Hello, I'm glad you're here. Welcome to Innovation by Design. I'm Brett Macfarlane, and I will be your trainer through these 10 modules. And I am an innovation trainer, leader, educator, researcher, and leadership development expert. I'm really excited that you're here because I really strongly believe and have seen that anyone with their creative capabilities and talents can be innovative. And I think that creative people in particular have a real potential to make a big difference through new ideas and making them real. And that's what we're going to do over these 10 modules. We'll work together to go through some of the theory and the logic, but also a lot of the tools and practices of how to make big, innovative, ambitious ideas real. And the course will run through 10 modules. This is the first one where today we will talk about innovation introduction. Then we will go through in the next module, design thinking as an innovation process, which will be followed by digital innovation strategy. So how do we ground our ideas within the logic of business? Followed by two very important modules where we go deep into what is user centricity and the tool of the empathy map to really get into the shoes of who our users are. And this is really important for innovation because often we're trying to solve a problem that hasn't been solved before, or the needs of what we're trying to solve themselves may be uncertain, which is why the customer centricity and tools like an empathy map to really get into the shoes of the user we're designing for is super important. This will turn into module 6, which is innovation concepting. For most of you, this will probably be quite familiar territory as it's your core capability, but we cover it here because innovation is a collaborative experience, and you'll work with peers and colleagues who we may need them to also bring their ideas to bring the bigger ambition to life. Week 7 is value proposition because often something new, we need to justify it. Why is the business doing this? Who's it for? And can our technology do what we hope? And the value proposition is a really important step because that informs our next activity, which is a lot of fun, which is prototyping. So making our ideas real and to see, do people really want to use it? And if so, are we thinking about it in the right way? And this is what in session 9, user testing, we're introduced. And it's very different from some forms of testing you may be familiar with, but this is more experimentation and validation around putting something out. It's actually very creative in the way that we'll approach it. And lastly, we'll talk a bit about iteration. And hopefully over these sessions where we approach innovation through a design-led methodology, you'll grow your confidence, your capabilities, and we'll also have some applied activities along the way. And maybe you progress some of your actual work that you're doing in your day-to-day. Right. So with those 10 modules lined up, let's take a look at our first one in week 1, Introduction to Innovation. So in this session, we're going to look at, very simply, the question of what is innovation. We'll cover the 10 different types of innovation as well as the innovator's mindset, because that will help you frame the rationale. What is even the point and what's it like doing it? As it's not necessarily for everyone, but I do believe that anyone can be an innovator. And we'll have a quiz at the end. And I like to start this one because with a film scene to set up what we mean by innovation, because the topic of innovation can be very debated, and there's a great way to start a disagreement in any meeting is just to openly ask, what is innovation? And often people will come with very strong individual perspectives. And that's okay, because innovation is a wonderful human trait. And it is something that really itself is a concept and idea. And the process of discussing what is innovation is often a great place to start of why an organization or a team or even an individual wants to innovate. Because innovation is often very misunderstood. But I like to think of this clip from the film Apollo 13 you might be familiar with. And in this clip, the lunar module is in space and they're having technical issues with it. And back at mission control, the flight commander tasks this leader that you see right there to figure out how to fix an air filtration device that had broken and they didn't have the parts for it. And he and his team go into a room and he says, well, we got to fit this thing with this thing using nothing but what's in front of them. And why I really love this scene as a way to set up what is innovation is, one, they have a clear problem that they've understood, is that they need to improve the air filter. That's the goal, actually. The problem they don't necessarily have yet to figure out, like, how do we actually make these things fit together? And so the task is quite clear here. But they've also created a boundary around it of working with what they have in front of them and within the time that they have around them. So the solution is unknown. They're going to have to not just invent something, but make it real. And they have some pressure of time as well. And to me, this is very indicative of innovation, because often there is a problem, is something to improve within your business or something in the outside world where people aren't living the best quality of life they could be, or are suffering in some way that they don't have to, because there's not a better solution that exists yet. And that's the job of the innovator, is to not just conceive of the new solution, but also to then make it real and put it into people's hands. And that's why I like, very simply, to use the definition of what is innovation as applied invention. And what I mean by applied invention is that you have an invention, an idea, something new that doesn't exist. Maybe it's a new way of doing something. Maybe it is a new thing, a new app, a new service. So there is the idea, the conception, but the idea itself isn't innovative. The innovation comes in applying it or making it real. So this is sort of a shorthand I use to say innovation is applied invention. You have something new that's novel and you make it real. And that on your day-to-day basis is probably pretty helpful, because it differentiates conceiving a concept, and not just any concept, but a new concept that doesn't necessarily exist, and making it real. Now, as I mentioned already, there's a lot of debate around what is innovation. And I'll show you a more technical definition just so that you're prepared. And there is one key thing I'd like to pull out of it. And this comes from a process that the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, led over about 10 years to try and come to a common global understanding of what do we mean by innovation. We know it's good. It improves the world. It makes people healthier, happier, live longer. But we all define it differently. Can we create a single definition? And I'll read this out. It's a mouthful, so don't worry, we're not going to be testing you on this, but there is one thing at the end I'm going to highlight. So the way they describe it, and 175 professionals came together, and they came to this agreement where they defined an innovation is a new or improved product or process or combination thereof that differs significantly from the unit's previous products or processes, and that has been made available to potential users or brought into use by the unit processes. So there's a lot going on in that definition, but the thing that's really important is that phrase differs significantly. And there's no magical ruler, measuring stick, or mathematical formula that will tell us something differs significantly enough to be called innovation. But actually, I would argue it doesn't really matter. I think the key thing is that this new thing is a step further from what we have now. And that's where it's a bit different from just simple improvements. A lot of what we'll do within the creative industry may simply be telling the world, hey, there's a sale on, and that's fine. Or, hey, we have the same product, but in a new color, or it's a slightly different taste. And that's great, but that's not necessarily very innovative. Where if it's a complete reinvention of a product, a totally new thing, then we start to differ significantly. Or if there's a new feature or functionality built into a product. So that's kind of the abstract definition of what we mean by innovation. I'll show a couple things to make it more tangible, because a great thing around innovation is that in companies and our clients, they often have many different forms of innovation happening at the same time. Now, hopefully this slide will behave, because it shows a portfolio of innovation that I oversaw with Barclays, the bank, global bank, mostly based in the United Kingdom, but they work around the world. And at one moment, we had 6 different innovative application products or services that we were developing at the same time with different teams. We had one, which you see there, Barclay card. It's simply their bank card, and it's helping people pay and see their balance. And we just made that as efficient and simple as possible. Nice, small, little iterative innovations. The second one you see there is called Ping It. And this was the first peer-to-peer payment platform in Europe. This is about a decade old now. But at the time, that was very revolutionary. You could just text money to someone else. And that required not just a nice application at the front end, but a lot of heavy lifting engineering behind the scenes, so that somebody could do that very simple thing of split a bill, or can you give me $5 or $1 or whatever currency you're dealing with. The second one over is called BMB, which is Barclays Mobile Banking. This was core to the overall offering of the bank, and it was the most innovative collection of services in a single place that led the market for a long time. And this is a day-to-day, something people use every day. And it reinvented the relationship between me, the customer, and my bank, no longer into the branch or ATMs. So at the time, that was very innovative. Now, those were quite familiar things to us, and we were also developing more forward-looking products at the same time. We have one which was called FX, which is foreign exchange, and that was simply a faster, better way to transfer currencies between different denominations. And then we had 2 more, which were even more futuristic. One called BaaS, which was banking as a service, which completely reinvented the relationship we had with customers to replace the current form of the bank. And lastly, we had something called family banking, which was designed to develop financial literacy. I share these to show that one company, and this is just the mobile app space, can have 6 going on, 6 different forms of innovation going on at the same time within one department. Across this organization, there's many different kinds that were happening. And sort of like that definition of what is innovation, I actually don't think that is that important around what is the definition of an innovation. What is important is why. What is it you're trying to do? And this is where I use the concept of jobs to be done. Because any great idea, invention, anything has a purpose, and unlike conventional briefs you may get for communications, often innovation briefs aren't necessarily very clear as to what the solution is or the path. But typically there's a core problem the business has. And I'm going to share 10 types of problems a business might have. And these will be the foundation of why we're trying to drive innovation. And these are the boundaries that will allow creativity and prototyping, experimentation to flourish, because it will give you purpose. And it also will help you if somebody comes to you and says, hey, we need an innovative idea. Say, okay, well, what does this thing need to do, and what does it need to solve? And that will help give you a wonderful creative springboard to work from. And so there are 10 jobs to be done that work across 4 different areas. The first one, maybe not one that we typically will work with, but is finance. So it could be the profit model, the way in which you make money. There's a coffee chain here called Costa that launched subscription coffee. So you don't buy coffees individually, you just pay a monthly rate and you get an unlimited amount of coffees. A neat innovation to the coffee buying experience. Another one here is called network. So this is the connections you make with others to provide value. We see a lot of this in digital technology, but an American Express, for example, they build out a network of lounges and they offer this to you, the customer. And that is a network of value that they sell you. The next one is process. And this is typically business processes within an organization, which can be structure. So how do you align your talents and assets Typically, this is a management function. Or process, how do you do your work? So workflow is very important, and how you do your work can be very innovative. And this is something that we often forget, is that the process in which we do something, we can develop that and do it differently. If we reconfigure it, production or different aspects of doing our work, it can be immensely innovative, new tools, etc. And that often is very core to us as creatives, of just how are we doing the work? Can we do it differently? The next one, and this gets into more traditional areas that you may be exposed with, one which is the offering itself. The first of the three here is the product performance. So distinguishing features and functionality, just how does it do what it does? You may get this with a different packaging or a product brief or customer experience. Like, how do we do it differently? The product system is complementary products or services. What do we bring together that we can offer different value to our customers? And then lastly, under the offering, service is actually really important. The support and enhance that surrounds your offering. For example, we see a lot of this for companies like H&M, where they won't just sell you a product, but they'll also take it back at the end. So they bring a full life cycle into the product experience. And those are different jobs to be done. How do we support and enhance our offering in a new way that A, adds value, and B, improves some aspect of society and life? And the last group is delivery. There are three ways, and this is very much the domain of the marketer. One is the channel. So how do you deliver the offering to customers? Amazon Fresh is a great example right now, where I have one near me up the street where it's an Amazon retail store. It's a grocery store, but I can just walk in with my phone. I take what I want off the shelf and I walk out, and it automatically bills me. So that's a very different experience in the channel. Customer engagement, which is the second of the three under delivery, is representation of your offering in business. So this is more how you do promise value to your customer and what's your long-term relationship. And Virgin is a really good company in this regard, in that they have a strong proposition, but they bring it to life across all verticals in a way that challenges the status quo. And this is very much into the offering and the functionality of what they have, but also how they deliver it. So if you look at the Virgin Rewards program, it's a brilliant example of customer engagement, how they really engage me across all the portfolio services. And the last one is brand. And this is the distinctive interactions you foster. So what do you represent and how do you make those memorable? And a company like Disney is amazing at this, of how they really build products that you feel a bonding to the Disney brand, but also whether that's watching a film, signing up to Disney Plus, or going to a park, there is a coherent belief of what they stand for and what you're buying into as you enter that ecosystem. And it's a very strong brand. You may love the properties themselves, like the films, but you also love the brand, because the brand is the umbrella that brings it to you. So these 10 areas, which are jobs to be done, are often the starting point of a brief you might have, where somebody says, we have a problem with our profit model, or there's something with our production process. Maybe that's within communications or within product. It's not quite working. We need to find a new way to do it. Offering, which is what we're providing customers. Maybe sales are declining, or there's a new space that the company hasn't been in before, and they need to find their place to enter. And then lastly, delivery, which is how you deliver the product and service and experience to your customers. And this channel is often delivered through innovative media solutions, customer engagement, which is different customer experience journeys, and lastly, brand, what do you stand for and how do you stand out as a business. And these are 10 different ones that I pull apart and share. And of course, sometimes a company needs to do more than one. But just to come back to that earlier point, to reinforce it around significant difference, I like to use a little example from music. What do we mean by that? So every year, lots of different artists will write another love song about gaining love or losing love. And writing a song about love itself and performing it isn't very innovative. We may love it, we may follow it, but the song itself isn't innovative. But sort of like what BTS and Coldplay did, while another love song isn't innovative, using holographic rendering and representation of a band and performing live around the world as a delivery was very innovative. And I really love this example because, one, they've taken something that exists, but they've evolved it, made it different from what's ever been seen before. And they also had some fundamental business problems around how do two bands be in the same place, contractual and legally, just from revenue perspective, it didn't make sense. But this way, from a creative artistic perspective, they're able to solve those business challenges from an innovative experience delivered to their fans. And that's a really neat idea that someone had. Let's use holograms to represent one of the acts so they could all perform together in different places around the world at the same time. That's a really neat idea, but the application of it would have been a very collaborative process. And this is where, now that we've sort of defined what is innovation, which is a significant difference that will be delivering some form of a job for a company, the actual process of innovation is very collaborative. It's not the lone inventor on their own. There may be an idea invented, but that itself is not innovation. It's a collective process of different people and their expertise coming together to do a lot of problem solving of, one, is this the right problem that we're solving? And two, how do we actually solve it? And that's a very long process that we go through, and we'll talk more about that. But what I want to do now is, in this first module, introducing what is innovation, is just talk a little bit about the innovator. And it's often said that a great innovator is somebody who has their head in the clouds, but also their feet on the ground. So they can think visionary and they can think big, but they also do and make things real. So they're more than artists and conceptual professionals. These are people who make things real. And this, of course, is, it's similar to any creative process where you have uncertainty, you have a lot of application, there's trial and error. But I do believe that the innovator trying to do an innovation concept does demand more of us, because there are so many unknowns and uncertainties associated with it. Going back to the example of creating a love song, if you're going to write a love song and record it, it's quite a known process. To write a hooky, catchy song, the creative act, that is hard, of course, but you still know you write it, you then go to a recording studio, you record it, you master it, and you publish it. That process is quite well known. Whereas the process of how do we work with holograms on a world tour in a mobile stage going from location to location that also is being filmed and people in the room can see how that actually manifests is quite uncertain. And until you get into it, you won't really know. And along the way of making it real, you will find all kinds of different things that go wrong, don't work, or don't live up to expectations. And this is where the uncertainty, ambiguity of the innovator that you deal with is really high. And I think it's very important that actually, apart from the definition of innovation, what's the human experience of being an innovator is a really important place to start. And I've just put some different examples of what makes a successful innovator as a member of a team, or even being the leader of the team. Maybe you do have a vision or idea, but bringing people together to make it real. These are traits that I found in my personal experience, but also in research, speaking to other repeat innovation leaders, as well as there's a lot of academia around this. These are the traits that really hold true, and it's important to have in our mind before we actually embark on an innovation process. I'll just read them out, starting at the top in the center. And to be an innovator, absolutely you have to be passionate, but you have strong vision, loosely held. What I mean by that is you have a clear point of view, but you're willing to expect the unexpected and to adapt and adjust based upon the real world results that come out. And this is where it is frustrating to be an innovator, either because the process itself is challenging, or you see something in the outside world that you're not happy with that you'd like to solve. But this frustration gives us energy and it moves us forward. A really key trait for innovators is to share the journey as mentioned, it's a collaborative exercise, but the share the journey is also communicating out, not going off into a room by yourself. There's that film I introduced at the beginning, Apollo 13. If you watch the clip, and you can find it on YouTube, after they come out of their workshop with the working prototype, the L filter, and they're walking and they put it on the desk of the person who actually asked for it, the guy looks at them and says, "What's this?" So even though he asked for an innovative solution, when he got it, he didn't know how to react to it. And what I mean by this is that sharing the journey allows other people in to see the progress and understand where it is. Because ultimately, when we see something new, our natural response is, "What is this?" Like it's a process of trying to understand. And I think that's very different from trying to gain approval, but it's bringing people who care along in the journey so they can understand the ups and the downs and really get what it is you're trying to do and how you're doing. Because not only is it new to you and new to the world, it's new to them. And helping them see that is super important. And that's where communicate to collaborate is really important. So collaboration is more than just your immediate team. That's beyond that. And letting people know what and why so they feel part of that journey. And communication is really key to that collaboration, of continuous keeping top of mind what's happening, why, and what's next. And this is where the innovator is very humble, they're flexible, and they're resilient. The Steve Jobs and Elon Musk version of innovation, actually, it's not quite true to reality. There are millions of people on a daily basis who go about innovating within corporates. And in corporates, you have to earn the trust and respect of others to try and do something new. It's different if your jobs are Musk and you literally own the company. You can do what you want. But actually, even within their firms, they empower innovators who do the actual work of developing the concepts and things. And that's where the evidence tells us that the successful repeat innovators actually are very humble and flexible and resilient people because they're collaborative. And they also recognize this bottom point where many ideas make an innovation. So to develop a holograph dancing troupe, there would have been multiple parties who need to develop ideas of how does it work, integrate with the stage designers, the lighting experts, the camera experts, let alone the people who make the technology, the people who capture the renderings. Every one of those points will have multiple ideas that will need to make that thing real. And that's where compassion for colleagues is really important for an innovator, because it's uncertain and it's a bit scary for them, just as it might be for you. Or you're a little further down the path because you've been thinking about it more. So you're more comfortable with the uncertainty. But when somebody new is trying to solve the problem, that will cause anxiety in them. And that's where, as an innovator or as a colleague, the compassion for colleagues is really important. And we're going to talk about empathy in a couple modules, and that will bring what we mean by compassion to life. And these last 3 points here are quite important around the why of innovation. And it's really key that we come into this, and what we mean by being humble is that we're trying to make things that people want. And what we mean by this is they may not know they need it, but there's things that we'd like to create that they actually use. And that's where sometimes innovation goes wrong. It's the idea that somebody has in their head and they want to push it out in the world as though other people want it. A friend of mine always talks about apparently one of the toothpaste companies invented a lasagna flavor. If you think of lasagna, the Italian pasta, as a toothpaste, it just doesn't really seem to work. So why they proposed that and didn't just think of it, but put it out into the world, it feels like they weren't really making something people want. And I don't know, or maybe when you go and pick up some toothpaste, you find lasagna toothpaste, but most of the world, we don't have it because they were trying to make something people didn't want. They didn't really think of from the customer's perspective. And that's where iteration nears perfection. In innovation, the concept of there's a perfect solution out there or there's a best practice, it's impossible because you're developing something that's new and it can always be better. And this is where the trap that sometimes you can fall into is to try and continue to perfect rather than getting it out into the world. Because by shipping early and shipping often, what we mean by that, and think of any digital software you have, you often get updates. And that's because they've done good enough job to determine what it is people want, the best they can within the time they have, and they've put it forward in a way they know will deliver value and will be good, but there'll always be things that can be improved, especially with digital innovation, because there's such a high level of complexity and expectations are always changing, that if we try to solve everything, we would actually never launch, or it would be so bloated and big, versus developing a concept, expressing as a prototype, and getting in people's hands and seeing whether they actually want to use it and getting feedback on how to make it better. And that's where these constraints actually give us space, constraints of time, of resources. And the innovator, their job isn't to think magically of what's the perfect solution. It's what's the solution that we can make within the time we have. And how can we think about creatively, and how can we express it in a way that generates all those great experiences that we love to make on a daily basis for people. Okay, so that's an introduction to innovation. I'd just like to close by coming back to that initial story. I think we all know that Apollo 13 made it back to Earth, but in the real world, what did happen is the individual really was briefed like that, and they went into a room. However, they worked for, I believe it was a day or two, and they weren't able to crack it. And so they went home, and then that next morning, one of the engineers woke up and was having a shower and then starts driving to work, and suddenly the idea hit him. And then he came back into the group and said, I think this is how we do it. And they worked together, they found a solution. And I always love that, because it adds a bit of the humanity to the experience and the frustration of trying to solve something you don't know how to solve. And it does take an individual to have a concept, but then to share that with others and the team to work together and to make it real. And that's really where that story around Apollo 13, yes, that one individual had the idea, but it's the whole team that made it real. And there is so much support and many ideas from everyone else, and they found a completely new way to make an air filter. Now, air filters aren't the most exciting and sexy things in the world. We'll get into some other stuff as we go, but I like to start with a very practical example like that. So to summarize and to close this introductory module, I just come back to the key points. Innovation is applied invention. You can think that there are 10 jobs to be done that are the why you're innovating. Innovation to no end is just art, whereas innovation has at least one reason out of the 10 to exist. And the innovator's mindset, the best thing I've ever come across that represents it, and I've seen it in action, and when teams don't do it, they fail to get traction. And it is the motto of ship early, ship often. As soon as you can, get into people's hands, get some feedback, iterate it, and continue to build and improve. And that, my friends, is innovation. Okay, the next class, we will look at the innovation process, and we're going to use design thinking as our innovation process for this MAD Academy. Okay, see you soon.